Thanks everyone for showing up. My name is Niall Hendry. I work for Move.AI. I look after partnerships with Move.AI, and Move.AI are a markerless motion capture company. We're going to dig into that a bit today on today's panel and what that means for both the media entertainment and other industries. I'm joined by a couple of esteemed colleagues. Eli, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hello, I'm Eli Stacey. I'm the Technical Solutions Manager at Disguise in the US. And yeah, I've been working a lot lately with the Move.AI Invisible solution. And really excited to talk about it and the future.
And Eric?
Yeah, hi, I'm Eric Roth. I'm a technology consultant. I've worked with Niall for a while now on many aspects of understanding the tool and the technology and seeing how it's put to use. My past is I've worked in visual effects and animation for many years, and I love just sort of understanding technology and seeing where we can apply it to make films.
Brilliant, thank you. We roped Eric in as a ringer at the last minute, so we're very honored to have him in, so thank you very much for joining, Eric. What we want to start off is like a bit of a sort of, not a retro, but sort of a bird's eye view of fundamentally animation and motion capture techniques, because frankly, as there are a number of technologies here already at SIGGRAPH, creating human animation is difficult, right? Ultimately, hand animating graphics is difficult. Wearing suits is complex and can be expensive. And AI tools largely are seen as not quite ready yet. I mean, Eric, from your perspective, you've worked across all of these workflows. Talk us through a little bit about the benefits of each and the drawbacks of each.
Yeah, so with the suits, I've worked on larger productions, whether it's games or animation. And so there are benefits in wearing the suits because obviously you're going to get the highest fidelity. But in terms of the setup, everything that's needed to be done in terms of camera count, calibration, et cetera, it takes a massive team. But when it's done properly, it's a great, there are tons of benefits. Of course, anything that comes out of there, you're still going to layer on top of that, right? But so in terms of the suit technology versus in terms of wireless, we can talk about that later, yeah.
Definitely. And Eli, from your perspective, I mean, Disguise, it's probably worth for those who don't know Eli explaining a little bit about who Disguise are and where Disguise have come from, but you deal with a large degree of real-time productions, right? And different technologies, like tracking technologies, slot into that as well. Do you want to talk a little bit around that?
Yeah, absolutely. So Disguise, we are a media server company. We've been used on a lot of different types of live entertainment, being primarily our background, concert touring, but of course more recently XR and virtual production has kind of entered the scene. And across all of these different markets, there's been, as you mentioned, so many different types of ways to track things in the market, whether it's tracking different projection surfaces on a theater, tracking cameras with Moses, for instance, is being used on here, or Stipe or whatever, or you're tracking individual talent with things like Blacktracks or OptiTrack. There are a lot of options out there. I think the real-time aspect is what kind of ties us in with a lot of these things, and I think that's why we haven't really seen too much of these existing tools in there. There are, some of them have been real-time. Like I mentioned, we worked with OptiTrack, but the obviously hand animation and some of the other tools are just not really there for live production because, we'll talk about it later, but some of the applications involve the talent being visible to the audience at the same time as they're being tracked, and it just doesn't work with the suit.
Yeah, and I think that goes really actually nicely into our next point. It's like there is a space, now this might sound counterintuitive for a markerless mocap company, but there is a space for all types of performance capture, right? I mean, Eric, in terms of diving a little bit into the workflows around where the different technologies have their benefits and sort of their understanding. It's really interesting now we're sort of entering the era of virtual production, but I think and people's understanding of that and more, Disguise workflows where it's more productized as opposed to people doing things that are very specific and niche. But where motion capture really came into the public understanding and a wide adoption understanding, is it fair to say that around the time of the Lord of the Rings first saga, that's when the understanding of what performance capture actually is at a mass level really came to the fore?
Oh yeah, definitely. It was funny because I was working, I had our own company where we were doing this for game development, and so every time we would talk about this, we would obviously reference to Andy Serkis or anything that people would understand. Kind of the same way that people are trying to educate about virtual production, and the immediate response was, oh, the ping pong balls on a suit, right? So we would say, yes, that's the idea. You put markers on there, it's optical tracking, you have cameras set up there, and that was the general awareness of it. And then we would try to educate people on this idea of fidelity and how it works and how you benefit from getting like a really good high track based on the amount of cameras, the amount of motion, markers, et cetera, and how it feeds into it.
Yeah, and that sort of education into what technologies are appropriate where, I think, is extremely important. For instance, I mean, I assume everyone here has seen Avatar: Way of the Water, but you know, the underwater motion capture that was done as part of that film, frankly, is extremely difficult. I mean, looking at the way that was done, I mean, the thing with a lot of us have watched the videos of how it was done, but Eric, from like a production perspective, you've got to use the most appropriate technology for your use case, right? And like in terms of actually doing mocap underwater, Markerless, honestly, like probably isn't the way to go. And the reason for that is water moves a lot. So in terms of like looking at that as an appropriate use of marker-based technology, what are your sort of thoughts and inputs around that as a method?
Yeah, so luckily I've never had to do water tracking, but just looking at it, there's so many obstacles in terms of what's going on down there, because obviously caustics, interference, et cetera, that is a humongous challenge. And obviously the moment I thought about any environment other than on a controlled stage, when there's anything involved in interference, I thought Markerless was definitely a good, way to evaluate that. Yeah, just even looking at this image, this is a very controlled environment, but most people aren't going to have that opportunity budget-wise to
be able to do that,
exactly,
right?
Yeah.
And I think, and where we've come from as a company is to take an alternative approach, right? So with the advances of things like AI, video processing, I mean, using AI to track people has been around for a long time. My background prior to working in motion capture was in sports data tracking. Sports data tracking to track people running around soccer pitches, baseball fields, basketball courts has actually been around for about 20 years. That technology is not necessarily new. However, the fidelity at which you need to then get to optical tracking level, such as some of the companies that are around us here today, is difficult and takes a lot of work. And the way that we've done it at Move.AI is we utilize video to understand what a human being is in the video. Where we actually use AI is to use key point recognition to understand a human being moving. What we then do is do a series of combined computer vision, biomechanical techniques, and mathematical techniques to actually take that data, to remove anomalistic data in there, because AI in itself is not perfect. We then do temporal smoothing on that data, and ultimately then output it as a raw file or retargeted file onto a character of your choice. Is it fair to say, Eric, though, there's been a healthy degree of skepticism around whether or not markerless motion capture can actually achieve the same results or even useful results within this space?
Oh, I was skeptical before I started trying it out, for sure, because I would see the videos, how it was created, but I won't talk about the skepticism, but I'll talk about how I evaluated it, which is the way that I deal with it was the moment I saw that, I said, okay, I need to look at this technology and see what it can do for me. And so I just had to play with it because it's so accessible, right? When you guys started this, it was an easy thing to download and evaluate. So
And how did you find that evaluation process? And then, Eli, I want to ask you around, again, the video-based method, because obviously that plays into your workflows quite well as well.
So the evaluation process for me was pretty easy. When I was doing it, I basically, from my experience, I did my typical motion valuations and tests and said, when I broke it down, what I would do is like, what is the minimum threshold, which was the 4-camera system, and I would expand it, bring one person in, do their typical motions, bring in multiple people, walk it through and see where it breaks and where it doesn't. And to be honest, as I did it, as long as I followed the rules, did the calibration like any other system, it worked quite well for me, right? I was, and why I'm up here today and talking to you about this is like I was pretty impressed just of getting straight motion from it. Obviously, it does some cleanup, which is really good for me because most of the time on the higher end, when I was doing something, I would go through curves, smooth it out, and I would get to that ultimate point anyway of where I needed it to be, right?
Yeah, definitely. And then Eli, in terms of like, we do a lot of demos with the real-time systems we'll talk about shortly, but in terms of the evaluation level of things, like, you've seen it firsthand where when we move into a real-time workflow, people just see it in front of them, right? And like the reactions that you've done, I think more demos than anyone I know. But like in terms of the feedback that you've had on terms of when people can actually see the data, understand it, and interact with it, what's that been like?
Yeah, no, it's been really huge. I think people don't realize that they can be a motion capture performance artist. You know, they don't realize that they can really interact with this medium. They see Andy Serkis, they see the expensive equipment, they see the suits and everything, and they don't feel like it's accessible to them and it's limited to only certain types of workflows. But as we're moving into the real-time world, which is where my primary involvement has been, we do see people really feeling like they're connected to it. They feel like they can impact it and be
ultimately
involved.
see the results of it, right? So this is actually something we showed at SIGGRAPH last year with our partners, Electronic Arts, where we actually were tasked with doing a side-by-side comparison of optical and markerless to sort of prove some of these theories out. This is a 75 camera optical system with 53 reflective markers on the body. Do you mind, Daniel, do you mind just rolling that video again, please? I'll try and do it myself. And what the result was basically we used 8 cameras running at 4K 120 FPS versus an optical system running at its own higher frame rate. And we were able to achieve basically equivalent results using markerless-based technology. And as a result of that, it's really been picked up across a number of industries. I think use cases where we want to get into. Can I go to the next slide? Thank you. In terms of practical use cases, again, right? So we were heavy into VFX, video games, etc. But what we realized quite quickly is that actually, if you can reduce the barrier to entry to creating content, then we can do things like a live experience at the V&A, where we brought in a fashion designer who designed a digital garment. We're able to allow people to capture their own movement and then see that movement back on the garment elsewhere in the museum. The example on the right-hand side is an agency and a partner of ours called Move.AI in Brazil. And they did an entire campaign for Heineken and a digital 3D metaverse campaign shot entirely on iPhones. I mean, from your perspectives, Eli, I'll go first. Like, the accessibility, how, from your perspective, Disguise works across a myriad of markets, but that lower barrier to entry, how do you think that then helps open up markets, especially with new tools like this?
Yeah, I mean, anytime a new tool becomes more accessible, you know, obviously more people are going to do it. But you know, as I was saying earlier, it's like everyone was focusing on the film and TV workflow. They saw Lord of the Rings and they're like, okay, we have to do that. But now, you know, as you say, advertising agencies, you have just regular companies that are, you know, they have an internal marketing agency, they have a production team. This is a whole new world of a tool that they just didn't think was possible for them to adopt. And there are so many different brands for clothing companies, sports, education fields as well. Yep. That use this.
Definitely, and I think, like, again, going to that ease of workflow as well, Eric. I mean, that's sort of part of what we discussed earlier, but the whole discussion that we were having very recently is around the accessibility, right? So actually utilizing things like consumer devices to enable motion capture opens up both people who didn't have access to mocap before, but in terms of you've worked at some very large organizations in your time, how does that then open up the accessibility for people who need motion data quickly, but don't necessarily are even not either on site with the resource or just don't have the resource to hand?
Yeah, so something I've actually been thinking about a lot in terms of that, the thought process on that, and it actually, there's some questions that have come up recently about something I haven't thought about, which is not only the accessibility, but the comfort of not being on a large set and in front of somebody. So if there's somebody in the art department, in animation, or somebody who's just trying to get a feel for a character, and they can be in the comfort of their own environment, and it's easily set up, and you don't need a massive environment to do this. To me, that's where I understood this technology immediately. It made sense to me. So the accessibility, going back to what Eli said, is like it opens the doors for people that I know empowers people that couldn't use it before. But on the larger production side, I think there is the idea of like having a small, stable environment where you can go in and like add movement to your characters that you couldn't do before because you'd have to like book time at a large stage, right?
And that is a perfect segue into integrating AI-powered mocap into live production, right? We often know that if you've got a device in your pocket, you can put it down, you can record video, you can then process it. But actually, we also know there is a massive need for real-time data. For that exact case, walk in, see it, try something, and do it. And what we have done is actually built a real-time version of our system. So we have a cloud system that allows you to upload video, you can process it, you can download it. But we also built a real-time system that uses RGB power over Ethernet cameras to stream into a local server that runs AI inference in real time and then spits that out into the Disguise workflow. Do you want to tell us a little bit about how that works, Eli?
Yeah, for sure. So as I mentioned, Disguise media servers are used a lot in virtual production and extended reality workflows for music videos, corporate events, film and TV, et cetera. And as you said, you just described the workflow, right? We have these array of cameras, anywhere between 4 to 8 to cover a 14 by 14 meter area, up to 2 people at the same time. And those people are then being sent as basically a skeleton into Disguise's designer software, and from there we can then control Unreal characters. That's great for virtual shadows. You know, anyone that's worked with XR knows that shadows in an XR stage don't really exist. The floor is an emissive light source, so having virtual shadows is one way to do that. Being able to have the character interact with virtual elements within the scene, whether it's triggering events or going into the next sequence. Or
Definitely. Like, so my background, including the sports data, sports broadcast, right? So actually enabling and opening up a studio is a 3D volume, right? You've calibrated it in 3D relative to the content and relative to the people that are in it. You can make it a fully interactive space and actually bring more content to life. Instead of using a button clicker like this, ultimately you could use gestures. You could use XYZ trigger-based graphics where you are in the studio, can make the content more engaging and more interactive. Eric, any thoughts there? Should we skip into real-time for other use cases?
I've enjoyed actually processing and talking with Eli about this in terms of the interactive capabilities. It's not my background, but I like immersive and I take it in. So just there's so many capabilities or rather possibilities there.
Definitely,
so
and I think
awesome.
that this content was created by our partners, Moment Factory, and they've been doing some really amazing interactive and location-based content where fundamentally what's brilliant about this is if you do go to a location-based experience, rather than having an experience that is fairly still 2D, you can actually utilize your own experience and interact with that. And like, again, reactions-wise from the markets, LBX is very big for Disguise. Like, the reaction there has been incredible, right?
Yeah, location-based experiences, as we call it, is definitely a huge area for this. I was just like, there were tools out there. There are LiDAR scanners that are doing real-time tracking. There are things like the Kinect cameras and things like that. But they all have, honestly, quite a few disadvantages. The ability to track multiple people in a fairly large area, have someone come up and interact with the screen is really impactful. And when I say interact with the screen, it's really interacting with a brand. And that brand is the one that set this up, and they're able to kind of control and offer their product or vision in a new way.
Definitely. So just it enables that sort of consumer experience to be far more, I'd say, interactive. Eric, I know obviously there's a lot going on in the virtual production space in terms of people right now, but in terms of actual workflows for things like actor reference, for things like in-thrust and character animation, and seeing that in a virtual scene, like talk to us about the advantages there where you can do that, one, markerlessly, and two, in a completely automated end-to-end workflow.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because I think there's possibilities here that we're evaluating for virtual production. One of the things that you talked about, Eli, was the shadow, right? So like shadow interaction is a challenging thing for anyone to accomplish. Um, Beyond that, I think there's just so many capabilities of, we've talked about this too. The thing that people haven't seen is just that offsite capability, right?
Yeah,
So,
you actually don't have to be on a volume. The great thing about it is it's a data stream, right? So you can
right.
actually, you could have an actor on the other side of the world. I think we did a test with this recently. I think it was just upstairs to downstairs in the London office, where we had
Yeah.
two stages synced together, and you could stream the data anywhere. So actually, your performer could be anywhere
Right.
in the world, and the actual visualization could be elsewhere.
And I think that's the important thing because that's what a lot of people talk about is that remote access on virtual production. So that, to me, is where it clicks right away.
Yeah,
of,
definitely,
Of
yeah.
having motion, characters, interaction.
And then just being able to sort of interact with that from both in terms of the content on site and remotely in engine as well is massively beneficial. But I think one thing that we've also been sort of looking at, and again, a lot of use cases keep getting thrown at us from all sorts of places, right? And what I wanted to do is pick both of your brains a little bit around, obviously we're here at SIGGRAPH and there's a heavy VFX, gaming and media entertainment focus, but actually when you can make human movement more accessible, it actually opens up more use cases in different markets, right? So in terms of health and fitness, for instance, right? Like, Eric's already smiling, go.
I don't have anything to say. I just when I was actually working in motion capture, the thing that I understood, other than I worked as a VFX artist for many years, it opened my eyes to like there's so many scenarios of people that just don't have access to animation or understand it, and that's why I gravitated towards you all. So that idea of like all the other scenarios of
Yeah.
simulations, et
And
cetera.
it's interesting because a lot of mocap initially came out of biomechanics, right? And then analyzing human gait. And so, like, I mean, Eli, we've had a few things pop in recently around coaching and physical interaction. I mean, in terms of where do you see, even personally or even from a disguise perspective, like use cases in this field?
Yeah, definitely a lot of use cases. I was really surprised at how many meetings I've had talking about this for education within that department. Usually it's coaching and things like
Yeah.
that, being able to, when you do a Fosbury flop, you be able to see it from every single angle. People are already using video reference for, that's 2D for something that's inherently a 3D activity.
Definitely, and like what we're getting as well is a lot of interest from like leagues and associations where they're going, well, actually, what we want to do is educate young people to move in a certain way, get them to move full stop, maybe have that as a character avatar that then they can interact with, but sort of see their movement on it. Now, of course, probably and I think in the NVIDIA keynote sort of highlighted this $50 trillion gorilla that's outside of our industry, but actually industrial and safety and simulation and training have a high degree of application. And again, I think we've had quite a few conversations recently around how can I do something in a safer way, for instance, let's say changing the track on a tank or changing a tire on a high-speed moving vehicle, without actually having to necessarily interact with that physically, but understanding the repetition of the human movement on that for training purposes. I mean, Eric, you've got a wealth of ideas buzzing around your head, but is this something that's come across your path as yet?
It makes complete sense, right? That idea I've worked on when I was when we had our motion capture stage, it was all about simulation training, right? So the idea of being able to do that and iterate fast on it makes complete sense, and also having the opportunity for people that, like we said before, don't have that capability in a larger stage of like, oh wait, let's, looking at it, reviewing it, and saying, let's do it
How do we
again.
do it better
Yeah.
and do it in a safe way, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'd say like kind of the thing to tie all of these other use cases together is the fact, and I think going back to the skepticism at the beginning, is that this is a real product.
Yep.
Like this isn't just like, oh, super cool, I'm using a webcam and now I'm getting some motion capture from my student film. It's like, okay, we actually have products that we can bring to these companies and say, okay, we have a support plan, we have ways to install it, we've done this before, and it's
This is how it
standardized.
works, and here's who's doing it over here. And yeah, having that, that uptake in the pickup has been, well, to be honest, through companies like Disguise and through the work that Eric's been doing, has been how we've been managed to accelerate that and sort of pick up that adoption. I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to throw into the audience for any questions that they may have.
Just want to say I'm a big fan of Move.AI. I think you guys are doing wonderful things,
you.
and I've been seeing it for a couple of months. I wanted to ask you just in general, because we're in this exhibition with so many motion capture suits.
Yep.
Like, when do you believe, like timeline-wise, that like your work, this sort of motion capture is going to replace the suits?
I think to the point earlier is like there's space for both. I mean, Eric, from your perspective, like you've worked across all of those technologies. From our perspective, there are use cases that Markerless can do that optical can't, and there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that things like large volume, high number of people, it becomes very price prohibitive to do that in a non-markerless way, right? Like there are ways to do it with suits, but it's complicated. So if you want to capture a large sports game, for instance, Markerless is the way to go because like you've got my background was doing that. You've got companies like Hawkeye, Second Spectrum doing that. But they're doing it for real time, right? And the difficulty there is spitting out data as fast as possible for things like betting is a completely different proposition to creating video game IP where you need as the highest quality possible. So, there are different use cases there. Eric, in terms of your perspective on both the different types of technologies coexisting.
So when I saw this tool, my immediate thoughts were, for now, the time being is I'm not thinking about it as when is it going to get to that. I'm thinking about it as what is the use case for this tool. And so what Niall and I talked about is there's early stage production for me at the studio level. So I'm thinking about previs. I'm thinking about art direction. And so that was actually a big problem we were trying to solve is that creatives weren't used to looking at still images. So in that art department phase, can we get just a little bit of life to it? And that was like a very exciting proposition for us to think about, right? Is this idea of like just having a little bit of movement gave people, filmmakers, ideas of like how, if the character was rigid or soft or however they looked, it added so much. But you can't have that, you don't have that accessibility for an art department to say, hey, we just need to book time in this. So that's just the way that I process this
frees it
tool.
up. And I think from your perspective in live workflows, you mentioned it earlier, but like actually there's crossover of different technologies operating together, right? Because you might want to be tracking a camera using OptiTrack, for instance, but also tracking a person just using Move.
Yeah, definitely. I think there is a huge convergence of everything is tracked. We have a very, very good idea of where everything is in this new world. So,
Yeah,
and then, it's all data, and you can use it to influence and enhance the experience for everybody.
So it depends what you want to do. There's space for both ultimately. Any more
Fantastic. Yeah, I think we might have time for one more question. Any burning questions from the audience? All right, maybe not.
Perfect.
All
Thank you
right.
very much.
Well,
Thank
thank
you both.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.